Welcome to the show. This is The Magician and the Fool podcast, episode number 75. My name is Dominic. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show. The other co-host is Janus, who you will hear from here in a minute once the intro is done. In this episode, we have the pleasure of welcoming back Mr. Nikolas Schreck for our annual Halloween traditional episode. This is always a fan favorite, and we are excited to talk to him once again. In keeping with the holiday spirit, we will be discussing some horrifying topics such as impermanence and no self and other such topics of existential dread. And speaking of impermanence, we have a big announcement to make for the podcast. This will be our final episode. You heard it right. Our final episode. To paraphrase something Heraclitus may or may have not said, the only constant in life is change. And so things are changing. It's not exactly an end, as the podcast will be morphing into something else. And we ask that you listen to the end to find out what is lurking around the corner as far as future projects go. I know that I speak for Janus in saying a very heartfelt thank you for many years of listenership. And whether you're a new listener or a longtime listener, we really do appreciate your participation, your engagement, your support. It's been very encouraging over the years. We'd also like to give a big thank you to all of the guests that we've had on the show over the years. We've learned so much from all of you, and we hope that your participation in the show has been of benefit. We will be doing one last kind of bonus episode to kind of wrap everything up with a nice bow, where we will be discussing our feelings about the podcast, our experience, and some future plans. Now let's jump into the episode. We dedicate this to Hermes and Asclepius, and may any merits that we accumulate doing this work be distributed to all sentient beings, so that they, together with us, may equally realize awakening. Welcome to the show. What can I say? This is an immense pleasure for us. As usual, we've got Mr. Nikolas Schreck back for our annual Halloween tradition. I think this must be the fourth, fifth, sixth time you've been on. I'm not even sure.
I think it is. I think we began in 2019.
Right. Yeah. So it's been a while. And this is definitely one of our most anticipated episodes every year. I get people commenting and asking, are you guys doing the Halloween episode with Nikolas? Are you doing the Halloween episode with Nikolas? So it's a very popular episode. So we definitely appreciate you coming back and doing this with us again.
Yeah, welcome, Nikolas. We're delighted about this.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And I can tell you from my point of view, I continue to get feedback from hundreds of people for all of the episodes we've done thus far. So, I'm honored to be here, but it really has made an impact. I probably not a month goes by that I don't get many, many requests or questions based on some of the interviews we've done before on The Magician and the Fool. And actually, someone just yesterday, when I put up a link to a Halloween music special that I did a few years ago, somebody said, "Are you doing The Magician and the Fool?" So yeah, people are definitely enthusiastic about it. So I want to, since this is our final episode, I want to begin by thanking all of you out there listening who have written to me and inquired or given me positive feedback about our former appearances. So anyway, good to be here. Where do we begin?
Well, there are many places to begin, but if you're not familiar with Nikolas, just go back and listen to our previous episodes or do a Google search.
If you're not familiar with me, what's wrong with you is the question.
Right. He's been around a few years.
What are you doing with your life,
He has a wide and varied background. He's a person who's lived through, I would say, many lifetimes in one lifetime, really, wouldn't you?
Well, actually, the memoirs that I've been working on for quite a while is called Past Lives, because I have lived so many lives in the time that I've been on this earth. And even this year, I've lived quite a few incarnations. So definitely.
What does that feel like at this point, having passed through the flames of transformation and gone through these different chapters of your life where it's almost like you've, become a different person? It probably feels a little bit like the glass bead game, where there's these things, they're strung along this thread that is you, but each one of these beads is almost like a different lifetime.
Yes. I think there's two aspects of it. And actually, I was thinking about that today. Actually, before doing this interview, I took a walk through the Halloween autumn, very orange looking German weather right now, very gloomy and Halloween looking, to a local cemetery. And I meditated there and sort of balanced myself to get ready to do this interview. And one of the things I was thinking about is, what is the essence of your consciousness that observes all the changes in your life? There is something which is connected to what would be called the Vajra mind, the enduring mind, that despite the flexibility and the fluidity of our lives and our, the various shiftings of the chapters in our life, there is basically an enduring essence that observes all that is unchanging. And I could connect to that earlier this afternoon as I was in the cemetery, kind of getting into the Halloween mood of the fragility of this world and of the imminence of death and the veil between the mortal world and the beyond opening on Halloween. And I was thinking how it's just a flash of the eye, how quickly life goes. But this consciousness that observes all the changes in my life has not changed. The outer appearance, their various phenomena of the various incarnations in my own life have changed, but this essence remains unchanged and fixed. And that, I know, goes back thousands of years. I know that same mind has been watching millions of other incarnations, as is true with you and everyone listening. So after a while, I would say my gut instinct to answer your question is it's like remembering various dreams. You can remember a very vivid dream. And I think, in that period, that was me. But there was, like you say, the string that connected the glass bead is still there. And that becomes stronger and stronger, I think, as your initiation goes deeper. And you have much less attachment to the current version of yourself, because you, hopefully with maturity and wisdom as it blossoms through spiritual practice, you start to see how incredibly fluid everything that we think is, how wrong our perceptions are about ourselves and about the world, and how pretty much nothing you predict is going to happen the way it happens. We sort of stumble through, hundreds of calamities and the samsaric transformations of chaos that we go through, and we impose a narrative on it to make sense of it. And this is something I tried to bring to the memoir that I've been writing, Past Lives. This idea that I meant to do that. Oh, this is where I meant to be, but no, it isn't. So I would say the ultimate answer to that, it's like remembering dreams, and you see how insubstantial who you were in that year or that period or that phase. What adds an extra dimension in it is like any public figure, I can't really escape the former selves. So it's like being haunted by yourself. It's like
interesting.
All those different parts of me are out there, and they're still active, and people are engaging in them, and they're still. So it in a strange way, it expands your spectrum of being, which is very interesting magically. It's like the person I was in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 70s, whatever, they are still active because people are still engaging with that aspect of me. So that as a magician, it adds some depth to your experience of these things.
I was going to say, it brings to mind the magical personality, because in ceremonial magic and in Western magic especially, there is this idea of the magical personality, which is a magically energized ego, and it just, whether it's, in some cases, it's deliberately created more I'd say in the satanically inspired stuff, but even when you're just practicing magic, there's an element of charging that the ego ends up acquiring from the magical process. The ego becomes animated and energized and becomes like its own entity. And it's interesting what you're describing, because these prior egoic manifestations or shells, you moved past them, but they were initially magically energized by your magic and your actions, but then they continue to acquire life force from the attention of the people that continue to invest their energy and time and attention and focus into these forms of you. So it's almost like you have these tulpas now.
Absolutely true. And if some of your listeners don't know, tulpa is in the tantric tradition, or this is sort of a Western interpretation of a tantric practice. You can learn through deep meditation. It's sort of a test of your initiatory ability to create a phantasmal doppelganger, a rainbow body. You can create an exact duplicate of yourself. And the point is to test other initiates that they see this doppelganger that you create mentally, sort of an egregore of yourself, and that they encounter that being realistically. That is one test of initiation. And because when I began my magical career, and it was connected to my musical career, and I've always understood performance as a kind of magical theater, I knew that I was deliberately doing that. I have always been very aware that I'm creating a legacy. Even when I had no idea where I was going, I was very conscious from some wisdom that came from my future self, as strange as that may seem. But we know in quantum physics that time is moving backwards, actually. So I feel like my future self gave me instructions in the past, and I knew how to present myself in these various phases. And yeah, so these various parts of me are still active, kind of like the Sorcerer's Apprentice in Fantasia, where Mickey Mouse, as the Sorcerer's Apprentice, unleashes this spell that he can't stop. I mean, in a certain way, and I've said it before, I've created Frankenstein's monsters of myself that are still out there, terrorizing the villagers even, and I am the creator, but I can't, they're going to keep doing it. So, and some of my past selves are more real to people than my current self, whereas others prefer to think, oh no, this current self is the real one. But they're all part of me. I don't renounce any of them. They're all active together. So I hope that's not too abstract a question, if you understand what I mean.
No, it's an interesting meditation on the illusory nature of the ego. And I think I think many people experience that to a lesser degree at some point in their life because, for instance, you may have you may have an old lover who bears resentments against you and sees you as this person that you've outlived and evolved from a long time prior, but they continue to see you in this light. And so if you return to interact with them, they refuse to see you for who you are, but will see you instead in that image that they created, which in turn was a subjective experience of you. You know, most people do not perceive the actual person they're interacting with. They're interacting with an idea of the person that they're in contact with, you know?
Yeah.
To actually connect with another person in a genuine way involves us putting aside our preconceptions and our misconceptions and our psychological unconscious projections and meeting them where they are and allowing them to define themselves through their own expression. But even there, most people sort of create a tulpa in their own mind of the other people that they're interacting with, which has more to do with an image of projection in their own consciousness than the person in front of them. And then other people will romanticize you, whether it's, again, an old lover.
Romanticize you or demonize you, either way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whether it's a child or a family member or a friend or an old lover, they're creating these images all the time too. So the strange sort of phenomenology of this impermanent ego is such an interesting topic to reflect upon. And then when you add magic into it, and when you add the public eye, the sort of society of the spectacle, it's a really interesting thing to meditate upon. This, like, after you pass away in several decades, Nicholas, these images, especially with the way that the technology is developing, these images of you are still going to be active.
I feel in many ways I'm already living a posthumous life where all of my different selves from the different decades are out there like ghosts living their own life. And they're autonomous, and people engage in them in an autonomous way. But a very important part of what you're saying, let's take us right now, the three individuals that are gathered here. The last time we did this was exactly a year ago. I was in Greece then, and in Athens, calling you from a hotel on the coast in Greece.
With spotty reception.
Right. And we had to keep reconnecting the call. But that seems like 2 seconds ago. However, all three of us have had so many experiences in those 365 days. We are not the same beings that we were.
Mm-hmm.
Even our cellular structure has changed. Our neurons has changed. But we are now, how could we deal with each other in an honest way, understanding we know each other, having done this since 2019, every Halloween, it's become a ritual, but we are not the same people at all who began in 2019. And, we're not even the same people we were a few weeks ago. But because of the illusion, this kind of persistence of vision, to use a cinematic metaphor, that we have the same body, the same voice, the same features, there's the illusion that we're the same being, but we have changed dramatically in all that time.
Right. And even physically, I mean, on a cellular level, like our bodies, we're not even necessarily in the same bodies as we were a few years ago, because all the cells have died and regenerated. And so even on a physical level, that's true.
Well, the Buddha taught that he actually used a measuring system. He said that in the time it would take 17 lightning flashes to flash, everything in the entire universe changes completely. It is no longer the same universe it was, if you can imagine 17 lightning flashes. So, we are coming at each other with preconceived notions and biases that Janice is this way and Dom is that way and Nicholas is that way, but we're not. Now, there is a kind of polite, civilized pretense, a kind of shared hallucination. We're going to pretend that we're the same people we were. And also we know that people are listening to us, so we have to kind of unconsciously project ourselves as being a consistent being, but we're not. I'm sure all three of us have had major dramatic transformations in our life, and hopefully as initiates we are wiser and understand more than we understood. And one of the things is seeing through the delusions we may have had in October of 2023. Hopefully in October of 2024 we see things more clearly. But how do we approach an interview from that perspective, understanding that we are not the same? We need to learn to know each other all over again. And when you meet somebody you think you know, even if you saw them yesterday, their whole life could have been turned upside down. So there's this illusion, this outer veneer of that's Susan, that's Joe, but it isn't really. It's just that's just a framing device we put on an ocean of transformation that is infinitely malleable. And how would we develop an initiatory way to deal with each other that would take that into account, rather than the sort of somnambulistic, sleepwalking way of assuming Dom is that way, he's like that, Janice is that way, Nicholas, he's that way, but we're not. And how would we break from the social conditioning that makes us deal with each other in this sort of stereotyped way, to actually be present to each other as new beings that we are, where we're not the same?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and it's reminiscent of like when you haven't seen a family member, like maybe a young family member, like a niece or a nephew for like many years, and you still see them as this little kid or this adolescent, and you see them again years later, and they've maybe have a family now at this point, have their own kids, and you're still thinking of them in this one way, and you meet up with them, and it's like, wow, this is like a totally different person. Same at their core, but I have to readjust now and address this person where they're at this moment rather than what I remember them as. And this conversation also is interesting because we just talked in our last episode about dreams and personalities and this flexibility of our personalities and our personas. And you kind of touched on it a little bit with magic and with spiritual practice. We're able to embody God forms. We're able to embody Buddhas, bodhisattvas, deities, and truly do so because we have that flexibility and we don't have a concrete identity or persona. So we are able to shift into these other more divine, maybe personas for a little while. And that's one of the real benefits of Tantra, I think.
Right. Well, in Tantric Buddhism, you are these yidams, these Ishkara Diva, these chosen deities, these wisdom deities, you become them. And the more that we do Tantric practice, we are replacing the small ego of Dom, of Janice, of Nicholas with Chenrezig or Vajrayogini or Manjushri or one of the wisdom deities, or one can do that working with pantheon of other systems and other gods. So after a while, you become less and less yourself, and you become much more conscious that you are infinite, that you are an eternal consciousness incarnated temporarily in this very brief physical vessel. And when you're on the bodhisattva path and you're here to become enlightened and to help others become enlightened, everything you do becomes devoted to that purpose. And you have less personal investment in what you're doing. Because when wisdom starts to inform you, instead of petty personal motives, you become a vehicle for the highest level of spiritual practice.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's very difficult for people who don't have any spiritual practice to grasp, because they are looking at it almost on an animal level of survival. They're doing what they need to do to survive as a physical animal. And when you have devoted yourself to initiatory practice, you become less of a fixed being. And I think that would be very disturbing for most people, were they to be faced with that or confronted with it suddenly, because there is no ground to that. There is infinite and eternal possibility and potential. And that's frightening to most people who need consistency, which gets into death and the ultimate transformation of these physical vehicles on Halloween, particularly worth contemplating.
Something I want to throw in there too. I've done a little bit of traveling recently through several states. There was, a month or two ago, I went on a trip to see some music, and just because of the traveling, I was in probably 4 different states in a very short period of time. And then a couple of weeks ago, I traveled again, and I drove for about 4 hours through several different places that were all very different. Mm-hmm. And that got me thinking about impermanence. That really, and Nicholas, you certainly would know about this, when you're in several different locations, when you're moving through different physical areas, it's almost as if the reality of impermanence becomes even more tangible.
Absolutely.
It got me meditating upon that, because I was like, well, I'm going from New England to the Eastern Seaboard, to Appalachia, to the South. And each of these areas is so dramatically different. And the people in each of these areas have different, ethnic, social, psychological, biological profiles, cultural profiles that are all very different. And then me in each one of these environments is a somewhat different person as well, because I'm interacting with a different set of variables. And this is so similar also to the travel through the Bardo or the Duat, where we're moving through these different spheres of activity, these different chambers that are each different. And in each one of them, it's like in the pyramid text, for instance, where Ray, through each of the hours or each of the chambers of the Duat, he literally changes his form each time. And in each location he's in, he's in a completely different form. He might be a falcon, then he might be a lion, then he might be a little scarab, then he might be a man, then he might be a snake. But each time he's in the different environment, he's in a different form. And I think it's useful for us to think of ourselves that way too, because of inwardly we're constantly in a state of fluctuation and change, even in terms of cell growth and cell death. Our cells are constantly consuming themselves, dying, being recreated, mitosis, and then we're moving through environments that are changing. The dynamic state of change is something that constantly involves death.
Yes, we are constant. Well, one practice that I teach to my students pretty universally, I don't have a cookie cutter approach to initiation, but one thing I have found useful in most everybody is to look at each day as you are being reborn. When you wake up in the morning, to immediately consciously think, this is a new incarnation. And when you go to sleep, to die to everything that you've been before, to let it all go, and to practice for death and rebirth by taking each 24-hour period of your life as a full life. So to learn to, as we slip into the dream bardo when we go to sleep, to treat it like death, and to loosen the iron hold of the ego, and to let ourselves go, and then to accept when we begin the new day, anything's possible. We are starting a new life. Let's not live the same life that we lived yesterday. And then certainly what you're touching on, the initiatory value of travel is crucial. On a practical level, as you were describing your voyages, since February of this year, 2024, I've been in Poland, England, New Mexico, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, San Francisco, Istanbul, since February. And I might as well have been on several different planets for how different each of the situations. And I am a different person in Turkey than I am in Haight-Ashbury. I'm a different person in Beverly Hills than I am in Albuquerque, and so I come back to Berlin, which is ostensibly my home, and I don't really recognize it because it's changed a lot if you're perceptive in that time. So it's a very useful and salutary feeling of not belonging anywhere and not needing to be anywhere. And I will have to continue to do this to work on what I'm working on in the next years to come. I more and more feel no need to own anything. It seems ridiculous to have things. All I need is what is my keyboard to compose music on, my computer to write books on, my shrine to do my spiritual practice, and and filmmaking equipment to make films. I'm here to create things and to do my practice. So more and more I just feel like I can wander wherever I go and do what I need to do. But of course, we become again a totally different person. And I have different social circles in all of these places that require different conditions. And I'm not the same person in Berlin that I am, in Las Vegas. You have to respond to the situation.
Right.
So I think that's very instructive not to be bound to one place and to one set of circumstances if you want to understand reality on a deep way. And then also you see the people who are stuck in these places, that's their reality. But all you need to do is go to the next reality and you see how arbitrary all that is, which gives you a very wide scope and sweep of how much magical possibility you can do and how thin the line between the possible and the impossible is. For a magician, that's very important to see. Again, the theme here is impermanence and fluidity, that situations are all very arbitrary and can be changed quite easily.
Yeah. And this speaks to me the importance of vows. Vows are a beacon or like a lighthouse. When we're in this kind of ever-changing fluid state where we're one person from one moment to the next, now we're a different person. Making vows are a good way to keep on a clear path with a positive end goal in mind, like the Bodhisattva vow. It keeps you on track because, like you've very eloquently explained, there is no necessarily concrete persona.
Yeah, well, that's a very important point. And in this extremely unstable time, which I think it's important, as a proviso to say, I think to kind of wrap up this period in which we have been doing these Halloween ritual ceremonial conversations, we began in 2019, towards the end of that year, towards October. And then the period after that has been unbelievably chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
The world has become tremendously unstable since then. And what as spiritual practitioners, the only thing that can give us an anchor in the storm of the Kali Yuga, of what we are experiencing in this almost unprecedented period of breakdown and decline, because it's certainly not progress. It is breakdown and decline on every level. The only anchor we can have in this stormy sea is in what in Buddhism is called samaya, or vow. And if we have a code of ethics that we have devoted ourselves to, we know the right, we have the eightfold path of Buddhism, which Shakyamuni gave us, which is a clear guide. And that's the only way. We have to react with skillful means to the ever-changing situation. But if we don't have that core vow of a certain practice, and if we don't wake up every morning and do a particular spiritual practice, and we don't do one at night before we go back into the dream world, then the forces of chaos, the maras, or however, if you want to look at it from a Gnostic perspective, the increasing malevolent power of the demiurge, another way to look at it, we will be swept by those hurricane winds, and there will be nothing to hold on to. So it's very important what you say. And of course, now a lot of do-it-yourself occultists and secular humanist type approach to spirituality, they resist of taking a vow, of being devoted, of saying, yes, I do know that this is an absolute way, that because of this kind of postmodern, or to use Robert Anton Wilson's horrible phrase, reality tunnels way of looking at things, like, oh, or chaos magic, which is equally detestable. This idea that you'll change who you are every day, and that's a very flippant and sophomoric way to look at impermanence. So yes, I can only stress that it's very important to be devoted to vows, as we do with the Bodhisattva vow, and to keep your samaya strong, because in this unbelievable flux of breakdown and decay and decline and war and violence and civil unrest that faces us, and plague and everything that we have dealt with and that we're going to continue to deal with, we need to have this very firm the only thing we can count on is our inner discipline. We cannot count on the outer world whatsoever. Never could, but now we would be absolutely idiotic to think that anything, including people, because I think all of us can notice, even because there's so much anxiety, so much fear, so much uncertainty, so much divisiveness in the world, you can't really count on people the way you could once either. Less and less. There's less courtesy. There is less commitment to firm agreement. Everyone's become like wild animals, like a dog eat dog. And
I could not agree more.
Well, and mental illness is just through the roof.
Yes. And I think this is something that we should address on Halloween too, is the instability of the world is always there, and permanence is a built-in feature of samsara. But since 2019, and especially since March of 2020, whatever metaphysical underlying foundation has created this very unstable world, it seems to have triggered the COVID phenomenon, whatever the hell that was really, and everything that's happened after it. I don't even need to enumerate it. Just unbelievable breakdown of chaos. It has led. This is very important for spiritual practitioners. There is an epidemic of madness in the world, and it's present in world leaders, and it's trickling down to the average person, and it is characterized by something we've discussed before, this really a manifestation of paranoid schizophrenia on a social level. The lowest, stupidest conspiracy theories becoming mainstream thought is one of the most disturbing parts of this 5-year period of the 21st century. And that is really a manifestation of insanity on a mass scale. That's
absolutely. And it has to do with the arbitrary nature of the information. Even though we're in the information age, in the digital age, there's an increase in the availability of all kinds of information, and proportionate to that, there's an increase in disinformation. And the increase in disinformation causes an instability in many people and a sense of paranoia. These are the same people, though, many of these same people are the ones who are very attached to their location. Just to backpedal a little bit, because these two things, in my opinion, interconnect. In Gnosticism, what we were describing about the virtue of being able to be a traveler and being able to not be attached to a location or objects, there's a term allogenes, the stranger, because the essence of the Gnostic experience of Weltanschauung is the idea of being an alien, now not in the sense of the ancient aliens nonsense, but in the sense of being really an alien to this whole world. You're really a Gnostic not because you read some late antique syncretic myths. you're really a Gnostic not because you heard some stupid podcast where people were associating one or the other presidential candidate with archons. You're a Gnostic
Right.
because you have an authentic interior experience of awakening to the fact that you come from a place that is different from this world, and so this world will never be your home.
Right.
And so, what does someone do like that? It's like that old show, The Fugitive. You're just wandering all the time.
And I always identified with that show, The Fugitive, which for those of you who are too young to remember it, yeah, and there was another show called The Invaders, where it was in from like 1966. This guy discovered that there had been an alien invasion, but only he could see the little signs. It's kind of like the invasion of the body snatcher. So, but it's interesting you said that. Just today, after my cemetery visit, I'm going to try to find it. I wrote this on my Instagram page, and it just came to me, this phrase. I'm going to try to find it. Yeah. I see the same realms that Werner Herzog sees. It is this world and its inhabitants who are alien to me. And I was referring to a quote in which he said, I see planets that don't exist and landscapes that have only been dreamed. And this sense of alienation is crucial to Gnosticism. And you either have it or you don't. And there are people who feel, I see more and more, there are people who feel perfectly at home in this world, and they are not going to wake up, and you cannot wake them up. It's too late.
And in any discussion of impermanence, I think it's important to kind of unpack this, right? Because you have these three soul types in Gnosticism: the pneumatikoi, the psychikoi, the psychics, and the hylikoi, or hoics, the hylics, the material people, or the clay people, the hoics. The clay people, the material people, are the ones who go around wearing a team shirt from their city, you know, like some football team shirt. But that isn't just a football team shirt. That isn't just a football team shirt for them. It is a manifestation of the egregore of their city, of their home, where they were born, where their family lives. And they identify with, I mean, when I lived in New York, I've lived all over the country, but, you know, when you live in New York, for instance, you got a lot of people wearing like New York shirts. New York, I'm New York. But like, you know, it's kind of obnoxious because it's like, you're not New York. You live there. You are not New York. Like, you are not. So who cares that you're from New York? Do you know who you really are? The same people overly identify with their ethnic characteristics, with their biological background, and those things have value and our ancestral. There is a value to ancestral awareness, but the surface level ego is composed of associations with location, and these people are so tied to the concept of to the idea of location that they are very, very enmeshed in samsara because they're connected to the material realm and the material place, because place and matter are intimately connected.
Well, so, these kind of people, these people who define themselves by some tribal or localized super identity that they cling to, they are the most xenophobic. They are the most frightened of the strange, of change, of anything different. You know, I'm from Kentucky. We do it like this in Kentucky. Or, you know, I'm from Boston. This is the way we do it. And that's true all over the world. But there is no way to combine that with an initiatory approach that sees reality properly. And of course, in this very anxious and uncertain time, we see that worldlings, as they would be known in Tantric Buddhism, are clinging to any possible identity prop that they can, whether it's football team, political party, locality, region, country, whatever. I've never seen a period where people, and also I think the internet has increased this idea that I belong to this community, a word that I hate. This community, that community. We know we're part of because the internet requires people to create a kind of persona, where it used to be ordinary people who were not in the public eye didn't have to have a public persona. But now, in a horrible proof of the prophecy of Andy Warhol, with everybody being famous for maybe 15 seconds, everyone needs to develop a persona. And so they have to have a very fixed identity. Everyone has a brand. I'm this. These are my tastes. I like that band. I wear these clothing. I'm part of this subgenre. Or these are my pronouns, and you better fucking call me by my pronouns because that's my identity. I'm of this ethnicity, and you better use the current phrase for that ethnicity, or you're disrespecting me. I cannot think of a time in history where people are so willing to label themselves in a very fixed manner. But as you said, they aren't connecting to something essential. They are connected to trivial outer things and defining their entire existence by that. And that includes, like, on the most trivial level, obsessive fandom with pop stars or political figures. I don't know if anyone can think of any, but
well, there's 2 points here too that we should detour into it for a minute because it's important. The first is this goes more into the impermanence of the identity, right? Because everything, these performative, there's such a performative ideas of identity. You know what I mean? It's so performative. It's so demonstrative. These categorical performative identities, but these identities, people need to understand that these identities are actually produced by the machine. These identities are created by the machine. The machine catalyzes or analyzes and creates these identities and sub-identities, and then recycles them and sells them back to people. And part of the reason on the greater scale for this is so that the machine can track, analyze, and control people.
And make them, and on a hyper-capitalist level, make them more efficient consumers.
Precisely.
So that they be a target audience, that this is the marketing niche that we're aiming for. So I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a that, I'm a this. And everyone's on their little team. This is something, as a musician, that always made me feel alienated and estranged, even though I guess part of the music I do is kind of rock music. But something I always hated about other rock musicians that made me feel alienated from them is there's almost like a sports team mentality to it, which does not seem to be an artistic endeavor. And even the fandom for bands almost feels like a sports team. It's not like appreciating Beethoven or, Messiaen. It's, we're going to our team and we're going to wear the merchandise of our team. And that has nothing to do with the art of music and the mystery and the profound initiatory meaning of music. And so that, like, as a musician professionally, that's always disturbed me, this kind of team spirit of, or I mean, that's the most horrible, the Grateful Dead fandom.
Oh,
Leaving aside that I cannot even bear to listen to one Grateful Dead song for more than a few seconds.
It's so bad. It's so bad. It's embarrassing to even see.
Well, before we alienate our Grateful Dead fans in the audience, speaking of alienation, I don't know if we have any of those, but this is an interesting conversation. As far as alienation goes, I think there is something to be a little bit cautious about, though, and not separating ourselves too strictly from everyone else in kind of an elitist way. I mean, I think that's a danger too.
That's an important point.
Yes, we have to have compassion for them, but if I'm, and again, it's strange. I was almost pre-thinking about a lot of these things in my earlier cemetery meditation today. If I'm honest about my true feelings, as soon as I came to this planet, I looked at other human beings as utterly alien, something that I had nothing in common with at all. Nothing.
Yeah.
I looked at other kids and other beings immediately, like, and I've mentioned this before, I felt, okay, I have come to the wrong place. I made a wrong turn somewhere. That what the hell are these beings? And it's taken me a long time to even develop an understanding of them enough to even understand what there is to be compassionate about them. Animals, immediately I felt a kinship with. Spiritual beings, gods, demons, that immediately I felt a kinship with. But Homo sapiens, I looked at as completely alien, and to be honest, I still do. I have to make a little bit of an effort to accommodate the way that they are. And yeah, and so that is a profound sense of alienation that, of course, led me to Gnosticism and Tantric Buddhism. But yes, we have to do. It's very important that we develop compassion for beings that are enmeshed in samsara, or from the Gnostic point of view, who are under the spell of the archons, whatever.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that Don brought that point up, because the obverse of, I think, what we're describing, and the irony of it almost, is that only by not associating with these categories and ideas, these produced identities, can we really connect with other people. When we withdraw our projections, when we'll let these concepts of what we're supposed to be or what we want to be fall away, then we can connect on a heart level, on a level of pure unconditional love with other human beings. When I am in a community where I live, and I love many of the people that I know, and instead of seeing them as how they define themselves, or how I might be inclined to define them if I were to give in to my initial perceptions, I view them from my heart as living beings, as human beings. And when you're encountering other people in a real way, in a lived space, in a physical space, in your community, then you can serve them and assist them and aid them. But I think it's important for people in this age to understand that parasocial relationships are not relationships. Somebody you know on the internet is not your friend. Somebody you talk with via chat is not somebody, you can develop a relationship from there even further, where we can deepen it and have a human relationship. But there are people whose only contact with others right now is through the machine, and they start to call these things Discord community. You know what I mean? And it's like, these aren't communities. A community are people that you can touch and taste and feel. Well, you might not want to taste and feel.
Right. Well, I want to taste some of them. It's true, but well, I can give you a perfect example of that. Let's say because of my work in the Manson phenomenon, there's this ridiculous phrase, the Manson community, and it's a bunch of largely mentally ill people who hate each other, feud with each other, are constantly ripping at each other. And I have made some attempt since about 2017 to try to bring these people together occasionally, at least once a year, in London, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco. And some of these people are sane and mature and able to do it, but online, they communicate with each other. It often turns into vituperative flame wars. And this is true probably for any number of communities and quotes that one's involved with. But I have really stressed, okay, let us meet in person. And it doesn't work. It absolutely doesn't work. And I'm never going to try it again, because I've kept trying it. And because they've developed these very rigid internet personalities, these avatars, when they come together in person, they cannot find common ground. And I see that. I think that's true for anybody in any kind of so-called community. And yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that we even have to point out what Janice was saying. Yeah, knowing somebody through the interface of these various apps and internet communication devices is not really knowing somebody. Unless you know them in person, you don't know them. You have no idea who they are, and they don't know who you are. And anything based on that alone, sure, that could be a beginning of a relationship, but it's certainly not a relationship. And, and the way that people are ghosted and suddenly abandoned or change their persona without any conscience is showing the internet is infecting ethics and the way that people deal with each other.
Absolutely.
In a very negative way, not in any positive way at all.
It's undermining traditional social skills, that you do when you have to be around people on a daily basis, when you have to interact with others on a regular basis, you develop an awareness of people's feelings and the fact that you're encountering real human beings. And you also develop an awareness of social consequences. But when you're in this virtual space, these people that are gaming half their day or 3/4 of their day and talking to people while they're gaming or on social media, TikTok or whatever, they don't have the same sense of awareness of the inner experience of this actual being, this vulnerable, imperfect human that has feelings and a lived experience. And so it's a very strange thing, but it also, again, in a weird, strange roundabout way, kind of points to the phenomenology of the impermanent ego that we were describing earlier, especially with you, Nicholas. I mean, you probably have to deal with these people frequently who think that they have some kind of relationship with you, but they're really just having a relationship with this image of you in their mind that then they're encountering virtually, and maybe think that by communicating with you occasionally, you have a relationship with them.
Right. Well, yes, it's this is a dilemma for anyone in the public eye that I wrestle with all the time. And, honestly, even the people that I know in real life, and there is no answer to this. Do they know me because I am me, the complicated and flawed and confusing mixture of things that I am? Or are they just seeing the projection of their fantasy, whether it's, oh, I hate him because he's that, or I love him because he's that? Is that who they're dealing with? And it's very difficult to navigate that. And I think anyone, the performer who has spent most of their life in the public eye, because I have since I was in my early 20s, I don't know any other life. So, yeah, that complicates the initiatory process of authenticity. Are people dealing with you, or are they dealing with the projection? And that's true for everybody, but it's magnified in the case of people who are performing or communicating to the public.
I know when I started having these dreams of you in like a tuxedo with the martini and Exotica playing behind you, I was like, okay, is this the real Nicholas? Or
well, it certainly is a form of me. It is a part of me. In Buddhism, there is a phrase called presentation. And when you have reached a certain level of initiatory development and you want to reach people, it is part of skillful means to present an image, which can seem theatrical, which can seem performative, but it's like, what is the best way to reach certain people that you need to reach? And for instance, I think tied into it, my own teacher, my own heart teacher, my guru, Trungpa Rinpoche, when I took the commitment to Tantric Buddhism, when I took the Samaya or vow to Tantric Buddhism, I said, should I go to Nepal? Should I go to Nepal and just stay in your monastery? And he said, we don't need Buddhist teachers in Nepal. Stay in the Western world, in Germany, and keep doing the things you're doing and reach people in those worlds that he, for instance, could never reach,
Yeah.
And that's why I have not gone the Lama approach, which I could. I have not wear the burgundy robes or become part of the Buddhist establishment. I take the yogic path. And so through the way that I present myself, I can reach whole different demographics, and hopefully, without preaching or, being overly proselytizing in any way, hopefully get wisdom into them in that way. So every initiate and every magician, you do need to think about, what is your image? What are you presenting? What is the best means to communicate what it is you have to say?
Well, let's talk for a minute about the extension of this. You know, the martini thing was a joke, but kind of
Right.
like also not. But you do have an experience, you and I have discussed this, of people spontaneously dreaming of you. And this is connecting back into what we were talking about with this sort of these animated tulpas of you that are moving around the space, uh, which are past projections of yourself. But there's also these inner projections where you have people reach out to you on a regular basis saying, Nicholas, I had a dream about you. And then you do
Right.
things in the dreams that are consistent with who you are. So
Yes.
you know it's not just them a desire projection, but there's something more going on here. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's quite an extraordinary phenomenon. I would say probably every other day, because I'm in touch with hundreds of people, and sometimes total strangers will say, "You came to me in a dream last night." And the odd thing is, 99.9% of the time, they ask me a question in the dream, or I'm teaching them something or advising them in some way. And this dream version of myself is saying what I would exactly say. And very often it's not what they want to hear. So it isn't just a fantasy projection. Very often, as I am with my students, rather harsh or critical and saying, don't do that, you know. But yes, but that is a traditional part of the Tantric Buddhist practice on one hand, because as a bodhisattva, you are making yourself of use to all beings in the universe, to every bug, to every frog, to every bird, to every being. So I know that because I do a certain practice every morning that is connected to Avalokiteshvara or Chenrezig, who is a deity that has this ability to go where he is needed, to help those who are in need. But it is remarkable. If I died tonight, I know that these dream tulpas would continue to instruct people forever. I know that they would. And so I'm not too worried about my own physical mortality, because I know my teaching and my work continues on other levels. And that may sound crazy to people that are rational, secular humanists who don't believe that there are spiritual realms, but you do reach a point, and I think any competent magician does too, because magic requires sending a form of yourself out into the etheric realms to change matter. And the more you do it, it starts happening spontaneously. So I don't have to think I'm going to send a dream to so and so that they will find useful. It just happens spontaneously. And this is the beginning of the blossoming of the bodhisattva activity, which I don't claim to have reached the full dimension of that, but that's a beginning. It is a CD, as it's called, and I didn't even ask for it, but it happens. And
which is how they work.
Yeah, and for the most part, and it comes from doing constant meditation and constant practice. It's not like some special characteristic of me. Anyone who does the amount of practice I've done for so many years, I think, would have the same experience. So, yeah,
well, it's amazing, because in the images of Avalokiteshvara, you see the 100-armed or 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, and then the multitude of heads reaching it upward into infinity, into the origin of mind itself. Right. And I believe one of the understandings of that image is that's because the Bodhisattva of infinite compassion basically multiplied him or herself into innumerable forms to be able to reach as many beings through the ocean of samsara as possible. And so then through your practice, through your yidam practice, you enter into union with Avalokiteshvara, and through your bodhisattva vow, that union allows Avalokiteshvara to manifest as you, and through you, Avalokiteshvara is able to reach these people who are receptive to you.
Right, exactly. I am a convenient vessel and vehicle for Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara. And yeah, because certain people, I think a lot of the people who I appear in their dreams wouldn't even think of looking into Tantric Buddhism or thinking about Chenrezig. In fact, they might be repelled by it. But because I am me, for whatever weird karmic conditions that I have become this creature or thing that I have become, it is useful for me. But I am a vehicle and vessel for Avalokiteshvara. But at the same time, to create more confusion and contradiction, also my practice of Setian theurgy, I also appear in a form of Set. So both of those things happen.
Well, there are bodhisattvas that, like Jizo in Japan, I can't think of the Indian name. I mean, there are bodhisattvas that are specifically preaching in the demon realms, in the hell
Right.
realms, and you could say that's what you're doing, in a
No,
way.
that's a good point. No,
Yeah.
that's a very good point, because I reach people because of my past and of everything that I've been through. I think that I'm able to teach on a deeper level of spiritual reality because I began in the darkness. I didn't begin in the light. I began in the deepest darkness. I came in to this world immediately attracted to the infernal and the demonic. And because I know it very well, and because I know what evil is, I have a very sober approach to it. And people who have been through, I mean, I can deal with prisoners. I can deal with people who have suffered a great deal in a way that I think bourgeois spiritual teachers who maybe have not experienced the kind of things I've experienced, I can reach people on a spiritual level that maybe other spiritual teachers are not able to.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
now, of course, other spiritual teachers can reach people I couldn't.
Sure.
We need all kinds for everybody to help all sentient beings to reach liberation.
Nicholas, could you speak a little bit for our listeners and those people who are tuning in specifically to hear your insights on discernment when it comes to spiritual experiences and dreams and visions? You know, you have people that may experience Nicholas showing up, teaching them something, but you may have some people who are idolizing you, experiencing a dream projection of their own ego as you rather than actually a manifestation of you.
Right.
And so whether the person is in a dream or through practice or even through entheogens, how does a person develop that discernment? How does a person see through the illusion into the actual inner meaning? What is true? What is false?
Well, I think that, yes, that's a very good question. The mind, consciousness, citta, is capable of creating anything, absolutely anything. And believe me, we can become very delusive. We can become very obsessed and focused on and take seriously hallucinations that are completely wishful thinking. And everyone must understand that a great deal of what we are thinking and what we think our life's about and our projections on other people are completely delusional. And so I'd say, first of all, you really have to train yourself to understand we are crazy. We are psychotic. We are in a state of complete confusion and ignorance of the nature of reality. And the three poisons of ignorance, above all, aversion, which means a feeling of repulsion or hatred to phenomena, or attachment, I need to have that phenomena. These three poisons are blinding us all the time. And our karma, our past karma, is generating delusive fixations on we have dreamlike narratives that we tell ourselves. And we better understand very clearly, we have to begin with a training to look at our version of the world that we've created. And the first thing you better do is see how wrong it is. And once you do that, you acquire a certain sobriety, and then okay, so let's say I have a vision of, ISIS appears to me and tells me blah, blah, blah. you don't get attached to it. It could be Isis appears to me and gives me the secrets of the universe, but that's just a mental projection. It's great that it happened, but we don't have to hang on to it. We don't. So you need to have a little bit of objectivity and distance from whatever happens. And the only way to do that is to see, I would say to everyone out there, look at your life and what you believe your life is about, and what your impressions of the people you know, your family, your husband, your wife, your lovers, your job, your career, your dreams for yourself, your hopes and your aspirations, and see that they are all hallucinatory. They are just convenient narratives you've created basically to make yourself feel better about the uncertainty of the world. If you detach yourself from these everyday hallucinations and you really start to become, it's like waking up from a dream and seeing that we're just projecting nonsense onto all the phenomena that we're experiencing. We're not experiencing it, like Heidegger would say, an sich, as it is. We're experiencing our through the prism of our biases and prejudices and hopes, and mostly wishful thinking, or people that loathe themselves through negative impressions of ourselves. Some people are egotistical and thinking everything's wonderful. Other people have a more pessimistic view. Neither are true. It's just phenomena is occurring and it's mysterious, and don't get too attached to it. So, maybe one way to understand that, how do you apply that to discrimination in terms of spiritual experiences? I've had extreme ecstatic and amazing mystical experiences, but after a while you just don't take them seriously. You don't cling to them. You acknowledge, okay, this happened. I'm not going to describe them because then it will give people ideas of something to try to aim for, but that will happen. If you do a lot of magical and initiatory and meditative work, you have mystical experiences. But what we are taught in Tantric Buddhism, and my own teacher, again, Trungpa Rinpoche, said in his broken English, don't let your thoughts take you for a ride. Okay, I'm experiencing this. A dinosaur appeared, so what? Mind creates all phenomena. So, okay, I observe it. I've had encounters with UFOs, which I've described. They were astounding, but I'm not hanging on to it. I'm not making a folk religion out of UFOlogy. I've had a lot of very strange experiences that there are no scientific explanation for, but don't dramatize it. Yes, it has personal meaning to me and it transformed me, but no more than maybe exposure to a work of art could transform you, So that's the important thing as far as discrimination. And like another thing I've said, like, let's take the Abrahamic religions as opposed to the Dharmic religions. The Abrahamic religions are very passionate and dramatic about what happens, very emotional. A burning bush happened, a 7-horned beast appeared, and you're supposed to get all worked up about it. But the Dharmic approach would be, okay, there's a burning bush. I see it. I acknowledge it as it's part of the emptiness of emergent, dependent arising. Something is manifesting as a burning bush. Okay, here's these 10 commandments were given. Here's the whore of Babylon, whatever. But Abrahamic religion, and this is a problem in religious people, they get very emotional and passionate about it, and that is not a good approach to discriminating mystics. They get caught up. Let's take the Pentecostal version of Abrahamic demiurgic religion, getting all worked up about it and extremely emotional. That's not a way to understand reality. You have to maintain a certain detachment and sobriety. Yes, people do speak in tongues and it could be incredible, but so what? Okay, it happened. I see it. I acknowledge it. And anything that you have, when you understand the mind is capable of anything, you can't take it too seriously. Like ghosts, when we want to get into spirits and ghosts for Halloween, I've encountered many, and I've encountered so many. It's like saying I encountered the postman dropped the mail off. There are ghosts. It doesn't mean I have to dedicate my whole life to haunted houses and going out and searching for them. They're there. They're here. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, there's a funny meme that makes me laugh every time it goes around the internet. It's really just an image of an old comic from an old, probably a pulp comic book or something. And there's this woman reading in bed, and the devil's leaping in through the window going, "Ha, I'm the devil." And she's like, "So?"
Right. Well,
She's like, "So what? I don't fucking care." Like,
right.
that should be the attitude. I mean, that's generally but that should be the attitude. But if you think about it from a technical, practical perspective, in dream yoga or lucid dreaming, if you realize you're dreaming, or in the lucid dream, if something dramatic happens and you become emotional, you usually either fall back into dreaming or wake up. From
Right.
a practical point of view, what you're describing about the Abrahamic orientation, as an aside, I would say that there is a Dharmic version of Christianity, which is the Gnostic Christianity, which is so radically
Absolutely.
different,
Absolutely. I want to make that very clear that, of course, I'm totally a devotee of the Gnostic approach. I'm saying the
Yeah.
demiurgic approach, the demiurgic distorted view of mainstream Christianity, is get all worked up about it and get passionate, and we're going to destroy sinners, and getting this very self-righteous drunkenness on your holiness. And it's actually the most egotistical
Politics of identity.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Gnostic approach is not like that. There's a certain sobriety to
Yes.
that.
And I would say that if you're encountering a burning bush and you're doing what you're suggesting, you're more likely to be able to enter into that experience mindfully and extract more meaning from it than if you become emotional about it. It just like in the lucid dream, where you're going to either fall back into dreaming or wake up if you become too emotional. If you remain calm,
Right.
you can encounter and interact with the experience, which will more than likely, those experiences are often just the seed or gateway to an entire sequence of experiences and initiation. But
Right.
you're not going to get there if you come to the portico of the temple and you start having an emotional breakdown about the fact that you found the temple, and you never enter the temple because you're becoming so hysterical about having found the temple.
Right. Exactly. Well, let's take some things in Western occultism. I don't believe Aleister Crowley had any transmission from Aiwass from his wife Rose. I think I don't know what you think. I think that's a complete hoax that he made up after the fact.
How is a holy guardian angel going to be an ugly looking alien with a giant head and tiny beady eyes? Sorry, like celestial beings are usually of magnificent beauty and symmetry and appear in a harmonious form, regardless
Right.
of the culture. You're going to tell me some ugly looking beady eyed thing with the head that looks like a side table that you could put a little bit of a vase of flowers on top of the flat head, or like some weird from the 50s or 60s Batman or Superman villain, and that's your holy guardian angel? Bullshit.
Right. Well, so I just want to say to the Telemites who may believe all that, but because unfortunately Crowley has become the poster boy for all magic, for all sorcery, I think it's useful. Okay, let's say I did have an experience in Egypt. I understand it. I did have a spiritual encounter with a god in Egypt, and it did transform me, but I'm not pushing it on other people and telling them that it's important to them. It was important to me at that moment when I was 21 years old or whatever, to my unformed mind at that moment, and it definitely transformed me, but I'm not preaching it to say to other people, go to that place and that's a holy place now and make it into a shrine, and that message that was given to me is useful to you now. But Crowley's egotistical attitude was, if he even had the experience, let's say he did. Okay, this is a new religion. I'm the prophet of a new aeon. That is the worst possible approach to mystical experience and spiritual encounters.
And not to get caught here, but let's just be aware of and acknowledge the fact that that's an implicitly Abrahamic kind of thing that he did there. Like,
right.
I'm the new prophet. That's not Egyptian. That's not an Egyptian perspective at all.
Right. Right.
It is not. It is a Semitic thing that he did. It's just an imitation of the pattern of Abrahamic religion. He was trying to be another Muhammad.
It's very Islamic, actually. And of course, the OTO then used the phrase the caliphate and caliph, and how, it's completely inconsistent and hypocritical. On one hand, in the book of the law, he's condemning all the other religions, Muhammad and Jesus and Buddha and all of them. And yet he is kind of actually, what I don't want to get into this too much, as Michael Aquino did. He broke with all these occult systems and said, but I am them. I actually am the summum bonum of all of them. I am what John Dee was referring to. I am what Aleister Crowley was referring to. Anton LaVey was just my predecessor, and I have superseded him.
I'm the coming one. I'm the prophesied coming son.
Right. So this is what I'm talking about, like Crowley, Aquino, this sense of I am a grand being above all beings, and I've been given this special insight. But rather than just saying, okay, I have that insight, and if people are interested in it, I can discuss it with them. But it doesn't mean you're the prophet of the aeon, or that you're a magus or a psissimus, or all of these ridiculous titles that are of absolutely no value to anybody whatsoever.
It's just it's so misleading too, because, well, I also want to mention this Islamic thing is really interesting to think about, because when you study, and I don't want to make this about Thelema, so I want to move on from here, but when you study Thelema, you see a very deep misogyny in it, sort of an objectification of women that is deep in that system, which comes completely from him, who used women and men as just sexual objects. But it's interesting, the correlation with Islam as well, which also objectifies and oppresses women. And so Thelema inverts that to a degree, but there is still this objectification of women and this elevation of woman as a prostitute archetype. So it's just an inversion of the Islamic orientation towards women, but it's still doing the same thing. In the same way that Satanism is a form of Abrahamic religion.
Well, I've killed that subject to death and tried to make it clear that Satanism is intrinsically just Christianity or Judaism or Abrahamic religion. Without you can't be a so-called Satanist without accepting the entirety of the rest of the Abrahamic religions, all three of them really, and all their sub-variations. But yeah, I mean, I didn't really focus on Thelema either, but Crowley's idea of woman is basically Andrew Tate's idea of women. It's about that spiritually evolved. It's, they're hoes and bitches, except call them the whore of Babylon to make it more, to give it a metaphysical. And that, to me, as a worshiper of Inanna, of Ishtar, of the actual whore of Babylon, it's insulting the Ptolemaic approach of the way that femininity is reduced to the so-called scarlet woman. But the point there is, occultists are the worst example of having, maybe they're even making up their mystical experience, but let's say they have one and then fetishizing it and turning it into a dogma and a doctrine.
Well, that's part of the trap or the danger in the occult scene, is that, especially when we're going back to talking about all these online personalities and online communities, really anyone could say anything about themselves and there's no way to dispute it. And so we have these characters who are professing to have these amazing experiences that are just beyond the pale. And maybe there was some kind of experience at the root of it, but just exaggerating things. And really people online wouldn't know you from Adam. And so they eat it up because they're, looking at a personality or maybe romanticizing these people. And so delusion is just rampant in this world, in this occult sphere.
Well, Yeah, that's a very good point too. And I think, yeah, because I think a lot of your listeners are interested in occultism and magic, and maybe I don't know how many are interested in actual religious, spiritual tradition, but we should address that. Is all too many would-be magicians and people in the occult world are immersed in the biography of these sacred cows of the magical world. I mean, Jack Parsons, let's say, and I happen to have researched him in great, great detail and interviewed people who knew him, people who knew Hubbard, the whole Jack Parsons Hubbard relationship. I talked to every survivor of all that in the 90s. Um, the way that he's romanticized and has become this heroic figure has nothing to do with the real person. And it isn't, I don't see many occultists or magicians developing their own adventures and experiences. They idolize people who did these lives, you know, and that, what is that? That's fandom, that I don't see people. I mean, I don't, if you like Crowley, I don't see a lot of Crowleyans climbing mountains or writing poetry or
Yep.
becoming masters or even traveling all over the world or even doing what he did do. So, you have to make your own myth and your own legend. I see far too many occultists get stuck in, a fetishistic obsession with the biographies of these sacred cow figures. So you had some specific questions before we started this. Should we get into them? Some of them are more connected to the holiday.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's jump in there. So, one thing I'd like to discuss is both in Indian Tantra and in Buddhist Tantra, there is the space of the smashan, the cremation ground or the cemetery where the dead are. And this is not only a physical space that sadhus and yogis and yoginis go and practice, but it's also an interior space after a certain sense as well. And I was hoping that you might be able to elaborate upon the practice, the cemetery practice, and the mystical symbolism of the cemetery in the spiritual sense of Tantra. Um, and there's a kind of a semi-famous image in Buddhism of there are the two skeletons, the male and female skeletons that are dancing in a ring of fire in the cemetery, and
Very appropriate to Halloween, actually. Yes.
yeah.
Well, the thing is the smashan or basically going to the charnel ground in India, in Nepal, in Bhutan, in the Himalayan region. Even though this is somewhat changing, of course, as things become westernized and urbanized, but the charnel ground is where corpses are burnt and left to rot to a certain degree, and nobody goes to them. They are unclean. They're considered to be filled with demons and taboo to go to. And in Hindu's the wrong word. Let's say in the Varma Marga, in the left-hand path of India, and then in Tantric Buddhism, which originally came from India anyway, so it becomes confusing. There is the tradition, which the Aghori sect was especially known for, of actually living in these charnel grounds where bodies are rotting and vultures and predatory animals are tearing apart corpses and corpses are being burnt and putting ashes on yourself and meditating in the midst of death. And obviously, a lot of our initiatory work is preparing for death and being aware of mortality. So, why is that an efficient thing to do? It brings us in an existentially vivid way in contact with death, and any initiate should be. The thing is, in the Eastern world, that's a long-standing practice. As we were discussing a bit before the actual show began, in the Western world, death is so clinical, and we are so removed from the messiness, and we don't see rotting bodies. We don't see bodies being burnt as you do in some Eastern countries. We don't encounter corpses in various states of decay. We couldn't, even if we wanted to, we couldn't go meditate on it because it's not available. It's considered a health hazard, and only morticians deal with dead bodies, and it's all very clinical, and we don't have a lot of encounter with death. So how do Western people practicing Tantric Buddhism on a deeper level encounter death and deal with death? Like I was saying earlier today, I went to this local cemetery that's very Gothic and picturesque, an old German cemetery from the 19th century. But there's nothing grim about it. It's actually quite beautiful and romantic. And in the Western world, we either make death picturesque or it's very clinical. But there isn't it's very rare for an initiate to encounter death in the same disturbing manner that Indian adepts could, of actually dealing with rotting corpses and skulls and, charred bones, and also all the demonic and ghostly spirits that such a place attracts. I mean, charnel grounds and cremation grounds are filled with malevolent spirits and the spirits of the dead. Now, that's a very useful thing. To meditate in that environment can make your meditative state very stable and solid. If you can test yourself and challenge yourself by becoming a competent and efficient meditator in that circumstance, that's really going to, that's going to make your meditation much more profound than doing it in a calm, doing it by a river or in a forest or in some beautiful environment. To meditate with death, with all these malevolent forces and the confusion of ghosts and all of that around you, would make you a better initiate. But
I wouldn't say that would be like a starting point for a meditator, though, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
So what about when somebody encounters... So the thing about working in a cemetery or even working at home sometimes, and even this working at this time of year, because we're talking about two things really. We're talking about place, but we're also talking about time. Because in the same way that the cemetery is the physical locus of contact with the world of the dead, or the smashan, this time of year is the temporal locus for that.
Right.
And in both of whether you're encountering the dead through the temporal locus of the period of the year of the season of Scorpio, or the physical locus of a cemetery or smashan or crematory or something like that, or even hospice center,
Right.
the possibility, if you're sensitive, or especially if you're engaged in spiritual practice and generating interior light and Shakti, you may encounter spirits of the dead. You may encounter earthbound spirits of dead who have not moved on, or you may encounter spirits of the dead who have recently died and are confused.
Right. I do all the time. Yes.
And so what can someone do to help these unfortunate suffering souls?
Right. Well, remind me to address that. I want to add one more point to what we were talking about, the smashan experience that is tied to Halloween in general and the whole celebration of the macabre, this particularly Western custom of celebrating the macabre on Halloween, but in general. When I was, I don't even remember what age, maybe 6 or something like that, 7. There was Warren Publishers used to put out several horror comic books. They were black and white comic books with like anthology stories, and one was Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirella, and that was what I read all the time. Every month they came out, and I read them religiously. And I had a moment of enlightenment and awareness at that very early age. I remember my grandmother was dying of cancer, and my mother and I went to the hospital where she was. And in that time, that was probably 1968 or something like that, the smell of the cancer ward was horrible. There's an extreme smell of death, but also of cleansing fluid, because there's a smell of death and of cancer and of this radioactive, they use these machines that had this ionic smell to them. And it was just a horrible smell in the cancer ward. And that I had seen some dead bodies before that. I'd seen some dead animals, but being aware of the imminent death of my grandmother in this very unpleasant, clinical, ugly, sterile environment. And I was reading, I think it was a copy of Eerie, or it might have been Creepy. I can find the cover and show you. And it was a very colorful painting of kids like my age breaking into a cemetery to dig out a vampire. So it was a very romantic, horrific portrait, but it made it glamorous. It made death and cemeteries glamorous and fun and entertaining. And it was a moment when I realized death is not fun or glamorous or entertaining. I thought this clinical environment and watching my grandmother's decline and all the physical problems she had and suffering and pain and operations, suddenly I couldn't take the whole Gothic romance and mystery of all that seriously anymore. I mean, although I still find it aesthetically appealing, but that was a moment, but that was kind of like going to the charnel ground for me. It's like, okay, this is death. It's not fun. It's not romantic. It's not aesthetic. It's painful and it's ugly and it hurts and it's not in a pleasant environment and there's nothing artistic about it. The suffering and the pain of it is real. And I actually witnessed my grandmother's death and saw, and that was important. So encountering death is a way that an initiate can wake up in the same way as a charnel ground. I would say that was an important experience for me. And after that, and then I thought, well, why am I attracted to coffins and the undead and zombies? And I tried to think about my karma. Why was I so, as many people in my generation why were we so attracted to dark shadows and haunted houses and cemeteries and all of that? It caused me to be self-reflective.
Very interesting. Yeah, I had a somewhat similar experience. I mean, I work in healthcare, or I have worked in healthcare for many years and saw a lot of death in that setting. But it was always a little bit separate because it wasn't someone that I knew personally, to a degree. And I think workers in that environment have to kind of separate themselves to a certain degree in order to just keep their sanity. But when my grandfather died, it was an open casket. And I don't know if there's a lot of open casket viewings anymore, but during my grandparents' generation, I mean, the casket would be kept in the house for days and days. So there would be and that would be a Western version of this, which we have lost. But even just the open casket itself in the funeral home, I mean, we were there for hours and hours and hours in this room with my grandfather's body. And, some relatives took it better than others. You're kind of trapped there with it and forced to kind of view it and be with it. But for me, it was a very transformative experience, honestly. And I came away feeling like it was a very positive experience. Not only was it a time for family to kind of connect and on a deep level through kind of this kind of tragedy, but just being there in the room with the body. I wouldn't say I was meditating, but you were forced to reflect. And like I said, it was transformative, and it did kind of change my perspective on death to a degree.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important for initiates to be in the presence of death and to see it. It automatically becomes a spiritual experience if you are metaphysically sensitive, because you cannot help but reflect on your own mortality and how 1 second before this was a person with, fully alive and vital, and then they're just completely gone. And you would then have to realize you are going to be that way too, sooner or later. And that is extremely important for any metaphysical work, has to be in the context of our imminent mortality. So, but it's still very clinical. Hospitals, morgues.
Right.
And now a lot of my work, I think people assume spiritual teaching, I'm just like preaching at people, but a great deal of what I'm doing is dealing with the sick and the dying and going to hospitals and doing the death rites or healing rites for people who are terminally ill, or people who have been in accidents, or students of mine, their relatives or animals. Actually, a great deal of my spiritual work is dealing with death, and I've done the practices while people are dying in the hospital. And it's of course it's very moving, but you eventually, it does become normal, and you have to start to see there's nothing more routine or normal than death, because it's happening constantly all the time. And after a while, it doesn't bother you. It certainly doesn't frighten you. And if you're in the health care field, you know that. You just start to see it as, and that's very necessary for spiritual practitioners, to just see death as completely normal and nothing to be frightened of, nothing to even have any concern about. And I'm truly not afraid of death. I never have been, for some reason. I've never feared it. I've always known that life continues. I knew it instinctively, or that consciousness continues. So yes, initiates on Halloween especially, but how easy it is to romanticize death in a Gothic manner and not really see the real thing.
Yeah.
Of it's not pleasant, it's painful. There are spiritually transformative aspects of it. Chogyam Trungpa, the rather controversial teacher, he stressed in one of his teachings that Western people have a habit of whitewashing death. Like when someone's dying, they'll say, well, you're going to a better place, and you're going to see your family. And that's not true, actually.
Yeah.
That isn't, if anyone thinks that, that's not what's going to happen. There's
especially if you were an asshole.
yeah, well, that gets into karma and the consequences of where the hell realms, the heaven realms, and all of that, which I think we discussed in depth in earlier episodes. But or like the romantic thing, like whenever a musician dies young, well, now they're jamming with Jimi Hendrix and Elvis and Rolling Stones, and like they're all hanging out in some ideal heavenly rock and roll club, exactly as they were in their youth. So suddenly people who are not religious at all believe in a rock and roll heaven where Kurt Cobain, David Bowie are hanging out together.
Jimmy.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it boils down at the end of the day, the root of all of these issues is most likely just fear. The reason that people attach themselves to these identities, whether it's, look, I'm from New York, I'm from Boston, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, create these stories about, Jimi Hendrix and Kurt Cobain together jamming. I think it's just grasping at something, because there is just this underlying fear of the fact that there is no permanence.
How can it be that Elvis doesn't continue to be Elvis, but he doesn't?
Right.
That if I idolize Elvis, I want him to be like a god forever.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's actually selfish. It isn't that people like this obsession with James Dean and Marilyn Monroe in Los Angeles. They're like the gods of that place. But Marilyn Monroe had a really miserable life. She was not someone to idolize. She was used. She was exploited. And people don't even want to hear that. They want to romanticize her and not see what a terrible, exploited and abused and harassed life she actually had.
She was miserable, but what they want to see is the image, which becomes a mirror for them to project their own idealistic images upon, of desirability and of all these other things.
Well, and also there's a weird cult in modern pop culture of early death, which is very sick, and I really don't understand it. It's like if someone dies young, they're immediately transmogrified into a deity, and you can't say anything negative or even realistic about them anymore ever again.
It's true. So can we, now that we've touched on that point, can we circle back though?
ghosts, what to do with spirits that won't leave.
How to and how to help them, even if they, sometimes it's not even, some won't leave, and people should know, if you're going to go practice in a cemetery or cremation ground, you need to have a authentic spiritual practice, because if you don't, spirits may attach themselves to you, and you may not realize that till you get home, and then you're stuck with an earthbound spirit. But sometimes too, especially as you develop in spiritual practice, you may have visitations from the dead, and they want help, and they're coming to you because they see that you're spiritually active and you might be able to help them, and they may not even know where they are. And so for somebody, for people who may encounter the dead in some capacity, what are some things that they can do to help those who have passed on, who don't know where they are or what's going on or need assistance in some way?
Right. Well, I think first, to put it in context, you have to understand that the dead are here all the time. They're everywhere. They're with us right now. They're in the very room I'm in. They're where you are. They are here. Think of how many people died today, this minute. And not only the ghosts of human beings, but of every animal, every sentient being. They're spirits everywhere. And we don't always see them, but they're there. And like, to put it in a greater context, when somebody is conceived, when we come into this world of samsara, when we enter this material realm, when a couple is having sex, there are always ghosts lining up to enter the material world. And there are demons seeking to enter the material world. But every time there's sexual activity between men and women and the possibility of conception, of coming into the world, the recently dead are lining up, waiting to jump into that, to become born again, because they don't know where they are. Like you said, they're confused and they're seeking rebirth. So that's how common it. I mean, we have to remember that we are the afterlife of the person we used to be. We are now living the afterlife of somebody that the person we used to be took themselves totally seriously and thought, this is my life, this is the real world. But no, now they've become us, and we are the afterlife of them. And eventually we're going to, there will be an afterlife of us, and we won't be important anymore. That person will be, they will think this is the center of existence. So we have to remember that we are ghosts, we are spirits. It's not like we are the living. We have this whole chain of millions of spirits that we have become.
Yeah, birth is kind of the death of spirit to a degree.
Right. Well, we come into matter temporarily, but we are, every baby you look at, I think, like, to put it in context, they're not a tabula rasa. This is when they look confused and they're screaming and they're crying and looking around. They are a recently dead person who has come back into this world. So that's like, I'm trying to normalize the idea of spirits and ghosts. Every baby is someone who died recently. It's not, if you really looked at it that way, that would be a very different approach to childhood and infancy. And in your early years, you're much closer to the person you used to be. Eventually, you sort of lose memories of that. Or some people do, some people sustain them. But that's a very fertile time for spiritual initiation, because you're still more connected to who you were than who you're becoming. So now, to put it in very concrete terms, I have had experiences where there have been the ghosts of people who I've known who were hanging around way too long, decades sometimes. And when I've encountered them, and when other people I've known have encountered them, exactly the same way. There was no doubt that it was the same person. Several people seeing the same ghost in different parts of the world. So okay, this person has not departed. And in one case, I went to the grave of the person and did the Tibetan Buddhist rite from the Book of Liberation by Hearing, which is commonly known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but that's not its actual name. And I told this person who I knew in their life at their grave, you have to leave. I made it clear to them, you're dead. You don't realize it, but you're dead. You have to go. And I did a fairly long ritual to implore them to leave using traditional mantras and reading from the Book of the Dead, but also speaking to them one-on-one as someone who knew them and just telling them, you go, you got to leave. And they did. And that ghost didn't appear again. So I think it's useful to put it in very real terms rather than talk about it abstractly. If you now, people who are fascinated with parapsychology, and yes, of course, it's interesting and can be entertaining to go to haunted places and to encounter these things as a kind of macabre entertainment. But you have to remember, these are tortured beings, tormented beings who cannot leave this world. They are not in this world and they're suffering. So we don't want to keep them here. We want to encourage them to leave. So if, assuming one has a real spiritual practice, you should have the compassion to communicate without fear. There's nothing to fear from the dead. Also, I should point out, there's nothing to learn from the dead. It's very strange that mediums and spiritualists think that just because someone's dead, they've attained some sort of wisdom that would be of use to us. There's no reason to fear them, but you should try to talk to them, speak to them directly, and tell them, leave, you're dead, you can go. You encourage them in a positive way. You need to move on to take another form, to become liberated. And there are, in Tantric Buddhist tradition, many mantras for that particular purpose.
Yeah, and just sharing the Dharma with the dead, as well as with demons, as well as with animals, as well as with gods.
Right. Let's say demons turn up. There's nothing. Now, actually, I try to keep this in real experiences and not just abstract things. On April 19th of this year, I had an experience in which I encountered the forces of darkness that I know very well from my prior experience with them. And they were still frightening. They are powerful. Even to me, who knows them and has worked with them and befriended them, they are very strong and very powerful and very dangerous. It's like being in a room full of sharks. Mm-hmm. They're dangerous. They do not mean well for humanity. They're not benevolent. There's nothing good about them, but they exist like sharks, like a poisonous snake in your room. It has its own existence, but it's not good for you. Right. And I encountered that and I had to deal with it. And I did have fear. I did have a feeling of dread because I was aware of the forces of darkness on a very profound level and worldwide. And I saw how deeply the forces of darkness are active in our earthly plane at this moment. They're very strong. But it's because of my devotion and my vow to Buddhism, I had this moment of fear, and it was useful. It's necessary. It's necessary to encounter the mystery and awe of dealing with the dark forces. And strangely, it was late at night, and the moonlight hit a book in a friend's house. It just lit up a particular book in his bookshelf. And it was a book called I think it's called The Tibetan Art of Dreaming. I'm not sure the exact title, but it was by a teacher, a lama who has actually taught me. And I saw his face. And at the moment I needed some kind of light in the midst of the forces of darkness, the moonlight actually fell on that book, showed it to me, and I pulled it out and I connected to someone who has actually taught me here in Berlin. Although that was in Los Angeles, and the person where that happened, they're not a Buddhist. I don't even know why they had that particular book. But the thing is, if you have a spiritual lineage, if you have devoted yourself to a tradition, our teachers and the bodhisattvas and gods and beings, they're there to help us. Mm-hmm. But if you haven't, you're going to be in trouble dealing with these forces. If you're on your own and you have no anchor and you have no bow and you have no foundation, then you're at their mercy. So I would say that's a very important thing in dealing with ghosts, demons, or other possibly malevolent beings. You need to have a very firm basis in a spiritual lineage and tradition.
Now let's circle back to something. I think we've touched on this in the past, but this is something that's worth touching on every time, really. How can we prepare for death? Because death is omnipresent. We're experiencing death every day, like we discussed earlier, the death of ourselves, the death of the old day, the death of the old self on a daily basis, the death of relationships, the death of different,
Podcasts,
huh?
death of podcasts.
Death of podcasts.
Right.
So how does one prepare for actual death in a way that affirms life, but also is sober and grounded and prepared? Because you, myself, hopefully Dominic could die any day.
Right. Hopefully, you want him to die sooner than the rest of us. I see. There's some hidden tension here. Well, my instinctive reaction to that is being present in this moment, being totally present in this moment, and being aware at the same time as we are experiencing this moment that it is transient. That we also, I think it really helps, as far as I have seen with my students, to understand this principle I was mentioning before. We are already dead. We're already living in somebody's afterlife. So there's nothing to fear. We've done it a billion times. There's nothing we've done more than being born and dying, born and dying, born and dying. So we are the afterlife of someone we used to be. When you're aware of that, then what is there to fear? We've done it before, and it's going to happen again. And the more we are present in this moment and see the impermanence of it, and see the fluidity of it, and how transparent it is, emptiness in the true sense of the word, sunyata. It, on a deeper level, this thing that's happening to us, this realm of life, this bardo of life, and this is counterintuitive, is not happening. It is a dreamlike illusion. This life that we cherish and hang on to with such desperation is not even, it's not happening with not even a little bit more authenticity or reality to it than last night's dream. This thing that we are experiencing is happening like a dream. Consciousness is making all this manifestation and phenomena, but it isn't happening at the same time. Like Schrodinger's reality, it is, but it isn't. You know, in last night's dream, you experienced something happened, but it didn't happen. Where is last night's dream? And in a moment, this moment that we have now is gone, you know, and in a very brief time in the cosmic scheme of things, this little life that we have here on Earth will be gone and utterly forgotten. No matter what we have achieved, no matter what we have done, we will be at someday forgotten. You know, eventually the sun and the universe that we're living in will be gone. The very structure of the galaxy we're in will be gone. The planet will be gone. So I think to prepare for death, first of all, you have to understand the illusory nature of life. It's different levels of dreaming. These different bardos. When we go to sleep at night, we are having a kind of little death, and we're giving up on this firm ego perception of ourselves, and we have to fear it. Now, the main thing from a spiritual practice is nothing. You can't take it with you, as the cliche goes. Nothing in this material world can we bring with us to the other world. The only thing we can bring with us is our karma. That will continue. And that is we are writing the script for who we will become right now through our ethical activities, through our what we say, what we do, what we think is creating the being we will become. So it's not so much preparing for the moment of death, which we've already gone through 100 billion times. It's thinking, what do I want to be? What do I want my next life to be that is necessary? And to know what our next life will be, we have to take control of this life. We have to really think carefully. What am I saying? What am I doing? What am I thinking? I have to think, why am I doing this? Am I just on, like robotically on automatic pilot? Am I sleepwalking through my life, or am I consciously doing what is karmically auspicious? That's very necessary. And then in Tantric Buddhism, there are practices which you can learn called POA, which you need to get an empowerment and actually be taught. You can learn to recognize the signs of death coming and know how to consciously depart your body at the right time to move to a better rebirth. So that's a bit complicated to get into, but I think that addresses the issue. First of all, there's nothing to fear about death, and any initiatory practice is basically getting ready for death. I think we need to understand that.
Nicely put. Nicely put. And I think there's also, just to add to that, when you're talking about something like shunyata or emptiness, or the transitory nature of reality, not to fall into nihilism though. There are still responsibilities that we have to adhere to. There are still things that we can't just say, screw it, nothing exists, doesn't matter what I do.
No. Well, to address that, in Tantric Buddhism, there is the admonition that emptiness and the idea of shunyata should really only be explained to people who are mature enough and ethically sound enough to deal with it. If you tell a sociopath nothing exists and it's not really happening, it's just a dreamlike illusion, then they're going to create all kinds of harm and selfish activity that will create negative karma for them and suffering for others. So actually in Buddhism, there is the warning not to misunderstand emptiness to mean nihilism, like nothing matters, but also to avoid what is called eternalism, which is kind of new age lobotomy idea, like good vibes only. Everything's fantastic. Everything's beautiful. Everything's a lesson. Whatever happens is wonderful. That's the opposite of nihilism. That's equally wrong view. Both of those two extremes. The middle way avoids both of them. So this dreamlike illusion that we are hallucinating together, because we have a mutual karma that brings us together to be in the realm of this podcast, and all the people who are listening to it are part of some karmic connection. Just because we experience that happening doesn't mean that it is really happening. Just like a dream, just like, if you have experience with psychedelics, you can have a very vivid experience that there is no way to scientifically, materially prove happened. Things happen, but they don't happen at the same time. So,
and we want to be aware of the tendency towards solipsism, especially in this very materialistic atmosphere. This is, the emptiness does not mean that everything is about you. It does not mean that all of a sudden now, okay, well, nothing's real, so I can do what I want. It's not, nothing is true, everything is permitted. That is not true.
That would be nihilism. And just in case anyone hears that phrase, I actually did some research into that phrase, nothing is true, everything is permitted, when I was writing an essay about the magical ideology of William S. Burroughs, who popularized it. This is a digression, but just in case it's important to clarify, Hassani Saba was the most devout of Muslims. He was not transgressive in any way, shape, or form. He was very devout, very strict, very severe, devout, pious practitioner of traditional Islam. And he never said nothing is true, everything is permitted. It comes from a French novel that Burroughs probably encountered in Paris in the 50s. And it's just from a fictional, it has, and that's a good example of how the occult world gloms onto and attaches to folklore and half truths.
Absolutely.
And you have people quoting this, that a junkie bohemian happened to encounter a novel, and now the entire very strict Islamic code that Hassani Saba lived by is forgotten.
I mean, there have been whole books written on trying to apply a hermeneutic to this idea and the Sufi implications of it. And
right, but he didn't say it. He just didn't say it.
It's really an interesting thing you're getting into there that we'll have to discuss at a later point, because this is also part of this egregore that emerged in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, this sort of underground current of alternative, sort of quasi-satanic, esoteric magic, that fixated on the Hassani Sabah, also fixated on a incorrect satanic interpretation of the Yazidi religion,
right.
which really... Right. It's really it's kind of like how Thelema focuses on what the church fathers say about Gnosticism and tries to make that a form of Gnosticism. Well, this false interpretation of the Yazidi religion as satanic is something used by the Muslims to justify raping Yazidi women, and yet this same movement that fixated upon this false saying of the Hassani Sabah also fixated on this illusory idea of Yazidi religion to sort of justify their idea of a spiritualized Satanism.
Right. Yes, that's a very good point. And actually, I'm working on a project with a colleague of mine, a British colleague, and if I described how strange it is, actually, some of the story, how Melek Taus, the peacock angel, has kept appearing in my life again and again and again since February of 2023. The peacock angel kept appearing in my life in the strangest way. And you remember the first incident where that happened, where you were interviewing a painter who painted an image of the peacock angel, and a friend of mine had seen the peacock angel in that image, and then I told you about it, and you said, "Oh, I'm interviewing that painter on your next episode." So it was very complicated. But now because of all these manifestations of Melek Taus, I'm now working on a project that will be a book and a documentary showing what Yazidism really is and exploding these ridiculous myths. And the funny thing is, Satanists have glommed onto it, trying to legitimize their half-assed nonsense as having some sort of real spiritual tradition, which it doesn't, because Yazidism is not Satanism. It is not devil worship. And as you pointed out, on the other hand, the extreme opposite, Islamic fundamentalism, ISIS, used the supposed same wrong idea to kill Yazidis and to rape their women and turn them into sex slaves. And so that's this kind of thing, of this romanticism, this false mythifying of like a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, like what Burroughs did with Hassani Saba. That can be very dangerous when people get things wrong. And people think, why is he so strict about getting things right? Why does it have to be true? Why can't we just fantasize? Why can't we dream? Well, part of mystical experience is grounding yourself in reality. It's not escapism. It's not fantasy. It really has to be grounded in accuracy.
And I think there's nothing wrong with, I love Edgar Rice Burroughs and Lovecraft and August Derleth and Laura Dunsany.
Art is necessary. Fiction is necessary.
But it's fiction.
The imagination should be explored, but don't, like Kenneth Grant and these other idiots, say that Lovecraft was an initiate who had secret keys to the mysteries of the Necronomicon. That's extremely harmful. It's misleading. And this is the problem with this kind of do-it-yourself occultism. Yes, that are actually ignorant people are not interested in culture or the arts because they don't have much imagination. But appreciate the arts for what they are. Don't say that it's really true. That Cthulhu exists. No, he doesn't, and it isn't useful to pretend that he does.
Very
That's
much.
a very important part. Is how should magicians and spiritual people deal with culture and the arts? Don't romanticize every novel and film. I mean, like the worst example I can think of on that level that everyone can relate to. All this pseudo Gnosticism, the fucking movie The Matrix is not what is happening. It is a goddamn movie. It's a metaphor. You can think of it as a metaphor, but it's way overused and is not, but now it's become practically like people believe. Andrew Tate uses the phrase the Matrix to refer to what he believes to be a real phenomenon. That's people slipping in a sheer delusion.
It's inherently problematic because the basis, instead of being an introduction to these ideas, which would lead people to contemplate them in a deeper way, they take it literally, and it already is a materialistic interpretation of the Gnostic worldview, because it is kind of saying that, okay, this is a simulation of material computers, of robots. Right. And so people can relate to that because AI is arising and robots are here. But that is not what Gnosticism is talking about. It doesn't matter if we're in 2050 or if we're in AD 50. Gnosticism is still pertinent because we're talking about the interior spiritual reality, the entelechy that produces this world. It doesn't matter what happens in this world. We're talking about something ontologically prior to the material realm, which generates it in perpetuity. We're talking about the creative principles that together in synthesis produce the material reality. And the purpose of Gnosticism, like in Tantric Buddhism, is to actually learn to recognize the influence of these principles so that we can become liberated from enslavement to the illusions that they produce.
Absolutely. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves. Secular humanist, rationalist scientists, or scientism, turning science into a kind of faith and dogma. A lot of people these days will accept this is a simulation. This must be a video game that some DMT elf created, or some kind of mechanistic, mechanical creation of an artificial world. And they really don't accept that there is a metaphysical or spiritual world. They've never had experience that there is spiritual reality that is unseen, that is not physical. So they create this terribly reductive and trite idea that taking Gnosticism and reducing it to a mechanical structure, and that's really a total misunderstanding. And they are very arrogant in thinking, no, this is what Gnosticism was getting at, was the Matrix, and somebody designed it. They are so frightened of the spiritual, of the possibility that there are forces above the human, because they're so anthropocentric that they can only conceive of things as a machine, as a thing. And it's a refutation of spirituality in itself. So
precisely.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Gnosis is not some hidden knowledge coming from documents that are not well known or were not well known at one point. It's not some secret. It's not some secret book knowledge. It isn't some secret interpretation of religious scriptures. It isn't some secret code, like the Bible code or something.
No, it's the opposite. It's a direct experience of gnosis. Direct.
Yes. You cannot get gnosis from listening to a podcast. You cannot get gnosis from getting the subscribers only Patreon membership. Gnosis is not analytical or discursive knowledge. It is spiritual experience that comes from the direct contact with the divine, with the sacred, with the numinous, period.
Right. And you could read every page of the Nag Hammadi scrolls and still not grasp it at all. I mean, that is the very essence. If it has the fundamental core, it is direct, unmediated experience with the divine without anything interface between it. No book, no scroll, no teacher. It's a direct communication. Of course, now, we have a teacher in Gnosticism, Dr. Stephan Heller, and we should honor him. But even
Absolutely.
he would understand, and he teaches you have to have this experience for yourself. He can guide you through what he experienced, like a mountain climber could say, "Don't go that way, go that way." But you have to climb the mountain.
You have
So
to do it
yes,
yourself.
yeah. So all of this kind of science fiction metaphors for Gnosticism, they could be useful if you're intellectually sharp enough to see them as a metaphor. Like, for instance, the work of Philip K. Dick, although he was not a Gnostic truly, his
You just
books and novels,
anticipated what I was going to say. Yeah.
yeah, his novels are kind of a useful poetry or metaphor for Gnosticism, but it's like this phrase, a finger pointing to the moon. It isn't Gnosticism itself. That's something you have to experience
Well, and
between.
it's funny you mentioned Phil Dick too, because it's the same kind of thing with him where you have these, and I kind of appreciate them, but you have these Phil Dick nerds who obsess over Philip K. Dick and fetishize his writing and obsess over his writing and think that they can
Right,
extract the meaning of reality from it. I like Philip K. Dick because I was like, whoa, relatable. Here's somebody who's
yeah,
experienced some things that I've experienced, and
right.
this is really helpful to me because I feel bad for him because he felt that he was going insane a lot of the time.
Was. Come on, let's face it.
Yeah.
He was mentally ill. He was a
Oh yeah.
mentally ill. He
And
was a very
on
talented
loads of
guy.
drugs. He was on loads of stimulants.
Right, right. And he did have, you can be mentally ill, you can be taking drugs, and you can have mystical experiences, but it's fiction. It is man-made fiction. It is not
Yep.
a guide to reality. It's a metaphor, but people are very literal minded, and our civilization has forgotten what the purpose of art and culture is. So it just tends to become very reductive. That's the
And
problem.
and to go back to the beginning of our conversation, before we enter the last phase here, um, that circles back around to the identity which is built upon where we live, what we do as a job, what team we prefer, the sexual orientation we have, like all of these different categorical um, elements of identity that we identify with, which often go back to place, lead the mind into a very literal, materialistic interpretation of everything in reality. And so it can be very scary for people to let go of all of these things, like who am I, right? Like Ramana Maharshi, who a lot of Neo Vedanta is based upon his ideas, but really he was a Shaiva in his core.
Right.
He sat
I
on
began
Arun.
meditating in that tradition when I was 13 years old. That was the first kind of meditation I learned, which is just to ask the question that he taught.
Who am I?
Yeah.
And when you get through the various levels of those, because you're not, and I'm very much into ancestral veneration, and I believe that there is a spiritual element to our own consciousness that does move through an ancestral line. So don't get me wrong here, but ultimately you're beyond even your ancestors. You're not, your family is meaningful, but if you deconstruct every element of your identity, what are you left with at the end? That's scary for people because they have to encounter at the end the radical encounter with emptiness at the core.
Yes. Well, let me make a point about that too, because ancestor worship is kind of part of the true Halloween tradition. So it is worth bringing up. Your physical body is produced by your ancestors and the DNA of that lineage. But your consciousness, your inner being has no ancestor. We are temporarily in this body, and that was created by physical copulation of this man with that woman and this man and that woman going on forever. But that isn't us. That is just temporarily the vehicle we're in. It's like you're a Mercedes or a Volkswagen, but the passenger in the Mercedes or Volkswagen is not that. So, yes, it's important and it's part of our karma, what our ancestors are. And of course, there's genetic proclivities and skills and, illnesses and things that come with it, but that's only temporary. That's the temporal material world. What we ultimately are, this emptiness, which is everything, is not connected to time or space. It is not connected even to this world. So, yeah, we can't get too hung up on that either. We have to see it in the proper light.
And the people who are in the Western mystery tradition, specifically the side that comes from more thelemic influences, please understand the void that they talk about in the Kabbalistic magic of thelema is not the same thing as emptiness. It is not.
No, people.
Emptiness is a problematic term for sure.
Right.
We should probably just touch on that real quick. Dom, can you touch on that?
Why don't you reflect on that?
Nothing is not due to something else. So everything is due to something else. So nothing is independent. So that's my understanding of emptiness, is empty of an independent existence separate from other things.
Right, including ourselves, most importantly. We are dependent on a billion other factors other than ourselves. Our ego creates the illusion that we are a sovereign being, that nothing affects. We're like an outlined cartoon, and there's the rest of the world out there. But that's not the way it is.
Exactly.
Yeah, emptiness also is connected to the word wisdom in Tantric Buddhism. Wisdom and emptiness are the same thing, and they are a feminine quality. I mean, emptiness can also be associated with the womb out of which everything comes. Mm-hmm. It is empty, but out of it, everything is manifested. So it doesn't mean a void or without an absence. It is a potentiality from which everything arises. It's a little bit like negative space in a painting. You need to have the negative space to create the image.
And ironically, that's the true matrix.
Right. Yeah, it's an interdependent web for sure. Like that's interdependent, or Thich Nhat Hanh says interbeing, in replacement of emptiness. I
love interbeing.
I think that's more productive.
Right. Well, the web is connected to the very meaning of the word tantra, which is weaving. It is that we are all woven together like a tapestry. If you see different images in the tapestry, you could think it's individual, but they're all part of the same complicated network of threads that create the tapestry. So tantra means to weave. So I think that's an important point.
Totally. And it's also very interesting because in the earlier Aryan tradition that later both Indian and Europe, especially Northern European traditions come from the cosmic mother come the three fates, the goddesses of fate, whether you want to call them the Moirai or the Norns. And
the Norns and Ariadne with the threads and their weavers there, yes.
And they weave the tapestry of fate. The mothers.
Well, these are universal facts. It doesn't matter which pantheon or mythology, the basic spiritual truth of them is there in all of them. Like a hologram, it's contained in all.
And then in our own families, our ancestral mothers are the familial manifestation of those threads of fate, which weave the family destiny.
Well, and as you pointed out, this word that has started to become used negatively in the manosphere and in this black pill, red pill nonsense, the matrix, again, there's an implicit misogyny there because, as you said, the matrix is the womb, the feminine mystery of wisdom from which we and all phenomena come from. And it should be venerated. It should not be looked at
absolutely
as a pulling force. The matrix is what we come from. And of course,
that is such an important point.
And I know there will be people who say, "Oh, look, he's thinking the evil matrix is good. He must be in the Illuminati or a Luciferian." but this is the misogyny inherent in this kind of modern manosphere conspiracy theory bullshit, is a hatred of the womb, of the feminine.
Absolutely. Whether we're talking about the womb world mandala, which you find in like Shingon Buddhism, for instance, or whether we're talking about the fact that Kali, the or Sophia, the mother, is literally the substance from which everything is created, but also she is consciousness itself. So our literal consciousness, when we're stripped of attributes, is the mother. Matrix comes from the word matrix comes from the linguistic root for the word mother, ma.
Like in Latin, mater, mater, matrix, material. And this gets back to the essential meaning of the true left-hand path. It is the veneration of the mystery and power of the feminine, Shakti, or the Dakini. So that's probably a good note to end on.
The matrikas, the 10 matrikas in Indian tradition, the mothers.
Right.
So yeah, we've been talking about transition, and so let's transition into another discussion about transition. So, Nicholas, as always, of course, we thank you for coming on and
Yes.
and educating us. But there is a transition happening with the apparent death of this podcast. Nothing is permanent, but it's transitioning potentially into something more. Would you guys like to discuss that?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, this is the death of the magician and the fool, but all death is transformation. It is dying, and we are part of the death process. And a certain aspect of all three of us is dying with it, to be reborn from the ashes into a new incarnation. So we can use this podcast as a kind of physical, instructional diagram of how reincarnation works. So from the ashes of the fool and the magician will come what will be known as Urgrund. And you can take the floor.
And Urgrund will be, well, first of all, I want to mention, I think in this particular episode of the podcast, which is so fitting because it's our final, I'm realizing, we have had Nicholas on consistently every year, pretty much almost since we began. So in a way, you've actually been a member of the Magician and the Fool podcast all along.
I do feel that way, and also I think that your listeners feel that way too from the response that I've from them. Yeah.
So we're transitioning into this Urgrund, which is going to be Nicholas and I tackling primarily topics of spiritual nature to educate people, to guide people, and also to provide what in Buddhism and in Zoroastrianism and in the Gnosis is called right view. We're coming from a place that is altruistic. We're not seeking to do this for ourselves, but because we feel that there is a pressing need in the culture of the world right now, and especially in Western culture in which we live, to have a balanced, unbiased, spiritual understanding of things that are going on, because many people right now feel very lost, very scared. People are thirsting for guidance, but they have trouble trusting people because of the sort of commercial motivation of so many. So we are seeking to provide to our limited ability to do so, an aid to others, something to be of benefit to others. And that desire and will towards benefiting others is something that we've had in the Magician and the Fool podcast from the start too. And all three of us have, every time we've come together as a group, our aim has always been to help and to educate and to assist and inspire. And Dominic and I, that's always been our mission through the whole podcast, was to provide authentic knowledge, to assist others and develop insight. We've always wanted, we know you, Nicholas, your motivation is always to benefit others. And Dominic and I, from the start of this, have had a very altruistic intention with this podcast as well, to benefit others. And so now Nicholas and I are continuing that conversation and moving forward to try and help others. And we will be very open also to people's desire to, if they have questions or points that they want explored, we will do our best to enter into those things. But this will be less interview based with others, although we will certainly have others on, and more focused on us acting in our capacity as spiritual teachers. Nikolas is a spiritual teacher. I am as well. I am a bishop of the Gnostic Church, and I spend a considerable amount of my time in semi-private life educating others and helping others and administering the sacraments to others. So our aim here is, as teachers and guides, to be of genuine benefit to others, to counteract some of the samsaric motivations of those posing as spiritual teachers in this age.
Well, and I will add only to that, which is, you eloquently articulated it. In this Kali Yuga period of confusion and anxiety, when so many people do feel very lost, we will be examining and critiquing the negative impact of false spirituality, because that is the nature of our time. This particular manifestation of what we're doing, which is taking the energy that we formed in The Magician and the Fool and bringing it to another level for this particular time. It's like a ritual designed to banish the demonic influences that are happening right now, which are of a particular, it's like a certain disease, and we are the medicine against this particular disease. So we are going to be critical. We are probably going to be perceived as being negative about certain things, sacred cows and things that people believe are true, which are actually dead ends spiritually. So there's going to be a certain critical attitude to what we do in Ergren, but it will, like this project, it will become its own thing. It has its own momentum, and it has been working to form itself. And again, we are instruments and vehicles of it rather than directors of it. We are vessels for it.
And whereas Magician of the Fool was dedicated to Hermes, to Lord Mercury, and everything I do is in perpetuity dedicated to him, this project is aligned along a little bit of a different axis. It is aligned in service to the Gnostic god Abrasax.
Right. And I think we can end on that note, because the very word Abraxas, which is not the name of the deity, but a spell that the ancients created, or that were given by the Godhead, by the being that is ultimately nameless, to even contemplate this name, the 7 symbolic symbols that represent everything. They represent the 365 days, the seasons, the 7 planets. They represent totality. Then we can end The Magician and the Fool and begin Ergren by simply stating the word Abraxas.
So that was the ever wonderful Nikolas Schreck with some deep insights into the nature of existence, really, into the nature of death, rebirth, the need, the ego and the self, and all of these things. It was, as usual, on the one hand, an amazing conversation, but on the other hand, a continuation of a conversation that we've been having for several years now.
It's always so much fun to kind of pick his brain and hear what he has to say. Like we were mentioning off air, he makes Buddhism, for example, interesting and accessible to maybe a demographic that normally wouldn't be drawn to it or interested in it. Because there are these preconceived notions and preconceptions about what it is or isn't. And then you get a character like Nikolas, who is so not the typical in any way, shape, or form. And he makes things available that wouldn't necessarily be available, or makes it accessible to people who wouldn't necessarily be seeking it out, maybe. So I really enjoy that and appreciate that about him, for sure.
Yeah. So I just want to thank Nikolas for the wonderful years of great episodes and friendship with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of transitioning into kind of our farewell. It's been an awesome experience, and I think we'll have maybe a one final episode to just kind of, without a guest, to just kind of discuss things. But it's very fitting, our discussion today, being the last episode, just the focus on transition and impermanence. Nothing lasts forever, and things constantly change and morph, and that's exactly what's happening here. So,
yes, for sure, the work will continue, but everything in time changes, and we hope that those of you who have enjoyed the podcast and appreciated it over the years will, on the one hand, understand that we've always tried to provide authenticity here, sincerity. We were never motivated by money with the podcast, and we've never made any money from it, really. We barely broken even with our costs. It's always been about not being about that, because everything these days is monetized, and everything is for profit, and everything has this materialistic orientation. And since we were boys, we've been passionate about this world. And one of our earliest points of friendship was our enthusiasm for esotericism and magic and mysticism, and some of our shared experiences, that's what brought us to where we are now. And so we hope that you have seen this and appreciated it, because it's always been a labor of love. And just to be transparent, I am going to be probably doing some more public work with my divination services, and maybe some reviewing of published materials and things like that I may monetize, but that will remain separate from Urgrund. If I'm providing services that are authentic, that's a different thing. But Urgrund will have the same sort of orientation as Magician and the Fool, where we are acting solely in our capacity as spiritual guides, as teachers, to assist others and to be of benefit to others. And we also want, and we'll thank him again in our last sort of wrap-up episode, but we want to thank Lord Hermes, Mercurius, Thoth, the great God. We have always dedicated every episode to you and to your influence, and we are immensely grateful to you, Father, for inspiring us to do this in the first place, for guiding us to those whose wisdom might be of benefit to others, and for receiving our oblation in the form of this communication, which you, of course, preside over. And we, again, reiterate our dedication to the great God Hermes Thoth through this podcast.
I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. I have things to do. I've put this off for far too long. I regret to announce this is the end. I'm going now. I bid you all a very fond farewell.